Hello, everyone. I'm Ananya Khaitan, and thank you so much for attending this session. Unlike most of the speakers you've been seeing in the lineup, I am not an academic or a researcher in the world of type, nor am I a type designer. I am a graphic designer. And when I think of a type designer, what comes to mind is someone engaged in a very meditative, monastic art form, refining and polishing forms and counterforms, zooming into glyphs and living in a world of black and white Bezier curves. And there's a real calm and awe-inspiring beauty to that image anyway. And in contrast, graphic design, dictated as it so often is by the whims of others, can like sometimes feel like we're standing at the side of a road, turning tricks and shaking our ass. So I'm extremely humbled and honored to be included in such an illustrious conference. And I'm super excited about sharing my work. So let me dive straight into that. So I live and work in New Delhi, India. Like I said, I'm a graphic designer and I do a variety of work, but today I'll be focusing on book design and image making projects of mine from just this past year. The reason I've called my talk Responding to the Times We Live In is because as graphic designers, we have the opportunity to engage with a lot of issues, and a lot of my work engages with issues of topicality and urgency and real sort of impact or potential impact anyway. So the number of issues that one can engage with in this day and age are, endless, be it from runaway capitalism to mental health to climate change to unhealthy beauty standards. But what I'll be focusing on today are two. The first, which is the rise of authoritarianism or near-fascism sort of the world over, and also the global pandemic that we're stuck in. I'll be taking you through three projects of mine: Awaaz, Lockdown Brain, and Towards a Post-COVID India. The stranger of these names will hopefully become clearer as we proceed. So I'll dive straight into the first of them, which is Awaaz. Awaaz is a Hindi word which means voice or sound or noise. And in this case, it refers to the Awaaz of revolution or resistance. A bit of backdrop before I tell you more about this project. A very quick overview of the fact that in India right now, the government, the ruling party that is in power is quite authoritarian and is borderline, if not actually fascistic in its motivations and tendencies, in a way that is really harming the various kinds of minorities, especially religious minorities, and the intelligentsia and culture in general. So Awaaz was an exhibition curated in upstate New York of various sound-based artworks, hence the name of the exhibition, made by Indian artists in India in response to the oppressive regime that exists. So the challenge for me as the designer for this exhibition was that there was this fundamental tension in the plan for the exhibition. What happens when artworks about resistance in India are housed in a museum in New York? The context is lost because these artworks are best understood by the people who are experiencing, what is going on in this country. So hence it was decided that if the artworks are going to play the role of the Awaaz of the resistance in this exhibition, perhaps the design can play the role of the oppressor. So in that way, we started thinking of the exhibition space more as an arena of conflicting voices, of opposing Awaaz. To this end, three symbols were created, which I like to call the symbols of fascism: the eye of constant surveillance, the mouth of endless propaganda, and the fist of brute force. Just classic textbook weapons of any authoritarian power. And as an Easter egg in there for those in the know, the logo of the ruling party was deconstructed and included in these symbols. So these symbols were sort of peppered throughout the exhibition space to kind of hint at the omnipresent oppression within which these artworks are situated. For instance, this is a sound corridor where on the one side you literally have speakers, blaring the Awaaz of resistance, facing off against the government. But coming to the typography of it all, the title unit of the exhibition was conceived to also hint at the sort of collective resonance, the rippling effect of various Awaazes coming together in protest. And this kind of spirit of expressively hinting at Awaaz or sound or voice in resistance and protest carried forward in the publication that accompanied the exhibition. This publication was initially conceived as an exhibition catalog, as is the norm. But around the time when this exhibition was coming together, nationwide protests broke out in India against a particularly dangerous piece of legislation introduced by the government, which was unfairly targeting religious minorities, especially Muslims. So instead of it being a catalog, the curator decided to invite the artists featured in the exhibition to submit textual pieces and essentially create a book of its time, again, responding to what was going on at that moment. And hence the Awaaz book was born. It was a book of the various artists' contributions, which are different kinds of content coming together as different leaves. There was like poems of resistance. One artist wrote a eulogy for lost relationships, which was a commentary on how during such times one finds out irreconcilable differences with one's near and dear ones, political differences that you just can't get past, and those relationships break down. Read, watch, listen list of books or podcasts or documentaries that one can consume during such times. So overall, the content was fairly somber and grave. And so the typography in the choice of typeface and the treatment of typeface sought to honor that, but at the same time hint at how Awaaz can manifest in different ways. So there can be the repetitive nature of a chant. There can be, the sudden echo of one voice calling out as emphasis within a protest, or just the sheer din of a protest of various heterogeneous voices coming together. Interjections, interruptions, and so on and so forth. So it became like an interesting typographic exercise of what are more and more ways in which one can hint at how Awaazes work together, how different people from different walks of life come together when united with a common cause. And I'm a real print geek. In any print project that I get, I try to get in as many kicks as I can. So, various kinds of printing processes, screen printing, letterpressing, etc. The choice of the cardstock, there was edging treatments, done all kinds of things were tried in this publication to make it a really nice tactile experience. In fact, one of the typefaces used, which was this lovely, in fact, it's a Libre typeface called Remina, was chosen because I could just visualize as soon as I saw it that it's going to letterpress like a dream, with its sort of blade-like serifs. In fact, a lot of the typeface choices in projects such as these tend to be in the Libre or open source zone, because I found that well-intentioned projects often do not come with very large purse strings. So that was Awaaz. Coming to the other two projects, both of them deal with the global pandemic. First, I'm going to talk about Lockdown Brain. Now, Lockdown Brain was a personal project of mine, and I define it as a woolly, stir-crazy state that can possess one stuck at home during a lockdown. And for those of us with the creative affliction, it can lead to strange creative outbursts. This project began when the nationwide lockdown started in India, which was in late March. And in Delhi, it continued unabated for, I think, over 3 months. And so stuck as I was in my apartment with very few outlets, I was kind of, jonesing for some kind of vent to express all the sort of feelings and concerns that plague us during such a bizarre time. Now, one thing that I do on my sort of as a personal hobby or interest of mine is I do a lot of writing of poetry, of rhyming verses, really. And I've been doing that since, I mean, for many, many years now, but only a few years ago did I start sharing it publicly. But I only used to share it in the form that you're seeing right now, which was just hand lettering, and fairly unremarkable hand lettering at that. Just lettering enough to make it look distinctive, and also to make me spend some time with the writing as opposed to typing out a poem and just shooting it off. But the reason I never really tried to design my writing was because in my head, writing and design existed in different silos, where one was my profession and the other was like a personal passion of mine. And I also had like these notions of that writing should stand on its own merit, etc., etc. But in the state of the lockdown, I just happened to make this piece. I was binge eating, stress eating, no access to gym, so I was gaining weight, and that was bothering me a little bit. So I wrote this poem. It strikes me as rather foolish in all matters but salaries, that we agreed to pay for things with money and not calories. And I styled it in like a receipt at a supermarket or a grocery store. And like in the visual and the sentiment coming together, I felt like there was something interesting happening here, which I wanted to explore further. So I kind of started doing a lot of what I'm calling, skeuomorphic typography, which, I mean, skeuomorphism is a term, any designers here who've done any amount of UX will be familiar with, which is a term used for design, which is derivative of attributes of analog things, even though it's in a digital context. For instance, the recycle bin doesn't need to look like a trash can, but it does so because just to harken back to its analog origins. So similarly, I just basically started casting around for any typography which in its native state means one thing, but then I could sort of put my poem in there and see if something interesting can happen. So for instance, this one was one based in the stock market, which goes, in this time of woe and fear, don't forget to shed a tear for those left with petty change, the players of the stock exchange. You, poor when you close your eyes, and penniless still at sunrise, can scarcely imagine the shock of waking up to crashing stock. But worry not, for before long, the government shall come along to grant them all a whole new lease, and you can starve to death in peace. Written, of course, as a commentary on how the governments around the world are bailing out big corporates and working people are struggling during this time. Or this was a tag, the tag inside any garment which has wash care instructions. Care directions aren't meant for reading once the colors are already bleeding. Here we are, a species shrinking in hot water and slowly sinking. And with each format, there's something fun that can be explored here. I got to make like custom little diagrams to go with my poems, which kind of hinted at wash care diagrams. In this case, this is written in the month of April, by which time, all days and nights are merging into one, and, the concept of time has gone awry. So here's the calendar dates of the month of April saying, don't know my name, do you? Are we all the same to you? And like I said, each comes with its own constraints. Here, I had to make sure the number of characters in my poem was exactly the number that one finds in a calendar grid. And of course, we all adopted a new email language during the pandemic. And this was like me poking fun at that. Hello, I hope this mail finds you well in these crazy tumultuous times. And while I know that you're dwelling on death and governmental crimes, insert work trivialities that we somehow still can't discard. That's it, back to calamity. My warmest regards. So, I wrote a whole bunch of these. I'm not gonna recite them all here. You can find them on my social media. I'm gonna now transition to the other project, which was made in response to the pandemic, which is of a wholly different nature. This was towards a post-COVID India, which was a book that was designed. The content of this book were legal recommendations and reforms put together by a bunch of legal researchers. And the aim, they put it together with great urgency because they wanted it in the hands of our parliamentarians before our legislature opened back up after the lockdown was over. Because if there's one thing that the pandemic did to all countries, I'm sure, and definitely in India, where it unearthed all the flaws that exist in the existing systems, be it the financial and job insecurities of daily wage laborers here, or the lack of access to the internet to so many people in the rural parts of the country, to students, especially from poor families, how are they to do online schooling, to rising domestic violence when couples are stuck at home, to healthcare workers who are kind of left at the front lines of this war, really. Just a whole bunch of problems that were already existed in the system, and this pandemic kind of unearthed. So this book sort of aimed to address all those issues. Now, I've done a fair amount of work with legal researchers and policy advocacy groups, and the creative liberties that one can take in that domain are not as high in certain other domains. For instance, style books for any academic journal for lawyers or throughout law school, they're taught that forced justified text is the only way to go. Now, to our eyes, there are few things as bothersome as forced justified text with its poor spacing, but that to them is what looks good. So even little things like making a book which has a rag is really out there for them, or putting the footnotes on the side, just because there's so many that if they were at the bottom they might swallow up half the page. These things which really are fairly prosaic for the likes of us are still like wins in that context. But that said, since I've done a lot of work in that space, I've managed to kind of create a real appreciation for design, and I in fact managed to make a whole book centered around the manicule glyph, and using it for annotations, for illustrations. It was quite an interesting project. So this particular book was conceived as one of transition from, the red at the spine to white at the edges, from the red of fever and affliction to, the white of hope and a future beyond COVID. In fact, even like I said, I'm a print geek, so the edges of the book were also sprayed with the special ink that we used to sort of heighten the feeling of transition. When it came to sort of the layout and typography, it was fairly elegant and academic, given the audience that this book was intended for. And the typeface used for the headline typeface, like the body typeface, was a fairly hardworking typeface by Typoland called Lato. But the headline typeface has a lot of character. It's by Grillitype. It's GT Super. It's got a lot of character while lending itself to the kind of academic countenance that I wanted for this book. And what I've found often in working this domain, that while in any design project, when working with any written content, the graphic designer has to identify, the typographer has to essentially identify, the inherent hierarchy of content and style it accordingly. Here, it's often I found more beneficial to have a back and forth with the content team to create hierarchy, even if it doesn't exist. For instance, I suggested that we say attention and call attention to each reform to the relevant ministries and departments that could, implement that reform. And so things like that. So really, it's a collaboration with content and designer to kind of really make the typographic decisions come alive in a more meaningful and intentional way. And the book was divided into various sections, and for each section there was a splash spread that was designed with, an image, an abstract image kind of talking about what that section was to contain, interacting with the distinctive typography of the rest of the book. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to pick up my pace. This was there's a few glimpses from the book. And with that, I come to a close. I look forward to a discussion and question and answer session. But before that, I'll leave with one more poem from the many I wrote during my feverish lockdown state. This one was a poem written entirely using Google autocomplete. And it goes like this. Why Corona? Why Corona so bad in Italy? Why Corona worse than flu? what coronavirus feels like, what coronavirus do, how much coronavirus in India, how much coronavirus test, which corona is gluten-free, which corona beer is best. Does corona always have fever? Does coronavirus spread fast? How long corona lives on surfaces? How long corona going to last? Indeed, how long is this going to last? And with that, I come to the end of this presentation. You can see my work and follow me on Instagram at Ananya Khaitan. My website's also ananyakhaitan.com. Thank you so much for attending this session.
And wow, yes, thank you so much for the amazing presentation. I was really fascinated with the way you present poetry, and it's so interesting. I mean, printing it on the bills and the recipes and on the calendars, and using a Google search for that to I don't know, and to make something out of that. That's great.
Thank you. I'm glad you liked it. It was a really fun project, and I mean, when I was stuck at home, it kind of kept me entertained.
Yes. Okay. So dear participants, of course, you can feel free to ask any questions now. They can be written either in the general chat where everybody can see them, or you can also write them to the Q&A section. It's specifically made for the questions. I will read them aloud, even though you cannot see them. But yeah, doesn't matter really. Yeah, we were seeing.
I realized now I should have probably worn the same clothes to create the impression that this wasn't a pre-recorded talk.
Yeah. This is the way to make poetry interesting for kids. Yeah.
Yeah. It could be fun.
I wonder.
Sorry, yeah?
Yeah, go on. Yeah, sorry, it's just a little bit like a small delay.
What also interesting about it was that this was like, I was writing a lot of personal stuff, about weight gain or about emails or about like lots of things that I was going through during the COVID lockdown. But when I was sharing it, it was sort of like, it seemed like lots of people were relating to it, which was nice, because the one kind of silver lining of this bizarre year is that it's kind of a unique global experience where everyone's kind of having a very similar experience, which isn't something which happens often.
Yeah. From my students here, Faish, maybe they cannot be here like in the chat. I just enjoy seeing new work and the use of the gradient as well, and how the text would fade in terms of visibility. Yeah, this red gradient in the book, it was, yeah, we can show it in the presentation now.
I'll just pull that up. This should be it. Yeah, it's loading. Yeah, so this is Sierra. Hi, thanks for the question, Sierra. So the idea was that since this book was about moving towards a post-COVID India, a post-COVID future, the book was in transition almost from COVID to post-COVID. So this file is taking some time to load, but yeah, so the idea of the gradient was essentially that transition. So the whole book was read at the spine, including like the edges of the closed book were also sprayed after printing, after cutting and binding, so that it's read at the spine, then it moves towards white at the edges. So even when you open it up, that's how it works. If the image would only load, you'd see it. Maybe if I just go instead to this, and is there a way to switch off the sound on this? Yeah. Hello everyone, I'm Ananya Khaitan.
Okay, so the presentation doesn't work, or what?
Thank you so much. So the PDF is taking time to load, so I thought I'd just scroll ahead in this you've been seeing in the presentation.
Okay.
I am not. Okay, no, I'm not able to scrub. Okay. Hopefully it'll load.
We'll just wait until.
Yeah, we'll just wait. Yeah. Okay. There's a question. Oh, sorry. This is the moderator's job. I shouldn't read it out, right?
No, that's fine. Okay. So we have a question from Ishan Kosla. Excuse me if I pronounce some of the names wrong. You can correct me. So were you ever concerned of openly expressing your views considering the current political climate in India?
Yeah. So hi, Ishan, by the way. We've met once at a conference in Goa, so it's nice to meet like this. I think, I mean, okay, so there was one poem which I didn't share here, which was extremely political. Ishan would be aware of the context. A temple was like there was a very controversial temple breakdown versus mosque Supreme Court decision in India, which I won't bore everyone here with. But on the day that this happened in India, I put out a poem about that subject, and I got, like, my phone blew up with trolls, with right-wing trolls and hate comments and like death threats and all kinds of things. It was quite insane. So that it did feel then like, okay, being very openly political it feels a bit dangerous. But at the same time, like DMs and comments, like that died down after 2-3 days when the news moved to something else. That died down. So I think it's only like truly scary if you're someone who's actually an activist. Like, I have a great deal of respect for someone who's actually out on the streets or in the courts or protesting and really putting their neck out there. I think while putting one's views through art or design is important, I would not equate it to a real act of courage. So I don't think I'm actually in any danger.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And like, for example, now I'm currently based in Warsaw, and we are having also a little bit difficult situation because now the city is mostly like protests are covering the city. You can see the sign here. It's the main logo of what is happening right now. Like, we are protesting because the government forbids the abortions and restricted the rules, and now women cannot make abortions in any cases.
Of course, yeah, I read about this. Yeah.
Yes, and the artistic society really really supports, and Instagram is full of posters, illustrations, and people are screaming, people are expressing their opinion, and that's really great.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's really the question from Miriam. So how long did it take you to find a rhythming Google
searches? Yeah. Actually, so this is the poem that Miriam's talking about, which was written in autocomplete for anyone who just joined. It took me a while because basically I just had to try out a lot of keywords to figure out, okay, what are the final keywords that are giving me, both in terms of sentiment and then in terms of rhyme, the kind of thing I wanted. What I knew for sure, like, so with each format, it's like, the constraints kind of is what makes it fun. So what I knew is what I wanted to end with, how long Corona going to last. So because like a poem should have like some kind of a proper ending. So that's the only one I kind of knew. I looked up how long and that came up. I knew that became fixed, and then everything else I kind of had to search and try and make that happen.
Yeah, and also the next question from Miriam was also right here. Why would you go with the academic typography layout?
Yeah, and she's saying determination. Yes, poetry is an act of determination. Okay, so the academic. Okay, so in this case, the audience for this book was largely lawyers or judges or policymakers in the parliament, in the legislature. So these for them to take policy recommendations seriously, it needs to hew to certain conventions of serious text, right? So it's an area where if I really kind of did a lot of hijinks in my design or my typesetting, it would actually like make it feel less serious to them. That's why I went with a more academic layout, and I reserved my more exploratory things for splash spreads.
Thank you for the question and for the answer. And we have the next one. So what is the role of graphic designers in challenging social political situations? I'd be interested to hear your view on authorship and design, the fine line between the two.
Yeah. So the project I presented here was actually a rare opportunity where the client, in this case, the curator of that exhibition, maybe it's better if I pull up an image from that. Let's go here. Yeah. So the curator of this exhibition or this catalog invited me to it was about a political subject, and I was given the space to kind of interpret it in my own way in the design, which is why on the authorship to can go from pure service, where you're serving someone else's content, to where your own sort of voice or signature comes in. If that's the spectrum, this one lies closer to the latter, and that was like a real pleasure and opportunity for me. It's not always the case that you're given that kind of room, and in those scenarios, I do think that the design plays second fiddle to the intent of the content. So if content inherently isn't political, I wouldn't feel comfortable shoving my opinion in there. Where my political opinion comes in is what clients I say yes to.
Thank you. And yeah, we have another question from Maria. Thanks for being so active and for your curiosity. That's really nice. Yeah, probably you're having like 6 students there sitting with you and also wondering how it's going here. So how did they respond to the unconventional red?
Yeah. Oh, very well. I found that I think we underestimate what people will like. I think it's like, I have found that even though when I'm working with people I would think are, boring in their tastes, they love being challenged in their tastes. Yeah. She's sitting with 9 students. Wow.
Okay. Oh, 9 even. Okay. Yeah, because when I was looking at the content and when I was preparing some pictures for the social media, I've seen just like your folder with 6 students. Now there are even more. Glad for that. Yeah. Good point about selectively choosing clients. Good for my students to hear.
Yeah, although I should say selectively choosing clients is obviously one needs some amount of privilege to do that. It's not easy for everyone to be choosy about clients. But if you can avoid working with, companies with sweatshops and mining atrocities and human rights violations, then please do so.
Yeah, and Miriam, by the way, from which university are you? Oh,
she's
ICA. Okay, I see. Yeah. I guess I was wondering what were the challenges you face when you design your own content that you author was working with existing content. Also in India, it's rare to see designers working on political projects. Why is that?
Okay, so that's 2 questions. So first, the answer to the first would be like this. The personal project I shared here, Lockdown Brain, was, I don't often actually end up doing a lot of personal projects because of time. I'm sure that's a thing all of us designers face, that we keep sidelining our passion projects for client work. So the authorship issues in personal projects for me just become about setting constraints for myself, because I believe that creativity happens best within some constraints. So in this case, it was the constraint of borrowing from native typography or Skeuomorphism typography and changing that. So that each kind of format I chose kind of created its own constraints. So I think maybe with authorship, I would say the challenges for me are constraints. So that has to be set. And then obviously not sidelining one's own stuff, even though it's so easy to do so. The second part is, it's rare to see designers working on political projects. Why is that? I don't really know how true. I don't know if I agree with that assessment, because I think there's a lot of political work in by designers, especially lots of designers, young designers in India, which they're doing. Whether they're client projects, that's rare. It's rare to do commissioned or client projects which are political in nature, but lots of sort of self-authored, I see a lot of self-authored political work coming out in India, and it's a lot of it is in illustration, not necessarily only in graphic design, but in the art and design space. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for the answer. And we have a question from the student Sierra Fish. What are some tips you have for ethical design? As you seem very conscious of designing ethically and for the benefits of great good in a sense.
That's kind. I try. I'm trying. Tips for ethical design. I think. First of all, I'm still young in my career. I started my solo practice just 3 years ago. And one thing that I can say for sure is that every great designer that one has heard of who is doing exclusively ethical work or working with for good projects or for social clients, you will, if you dig deep into their careers, you'll find they spent a good amount of time not doing that, making money so that they are able to do that. I think, to talk about doing work exclusively in like the development sector, etc., without acknowledging that the real money lies with corporate clients is it wouldn't be fair to not acknowledge that. So but that said, I think I have found that if one is able to convince people of the value addition of design to their causes, any cause that you like, and if you find people who are working on that cause, if you can demonstrate how valuable design can be, then they're actually able to generate funding to invest in design. And in that way, it actually becomes like viable as an option, which is kind of where I'm like kind of finding myself now. So my tip would be to kind of really take it as a challenge that you have to kind of prove that design is important so that people invest in design in that zone, because corporates are convinced of design's value, but not so much not for profit or development people.
Yes, Sierra says that is very good point, and she's grateful for the input and for the response. Yeah, so here also it was very significant thought for me since I'm also a student, and it's very nice to hear the opinion and to have some guides in the further things we're going to do.
Awesome. So is that about it? I don't know if there's no more questions, I think.
Yeah, we'll see if the chat is going to ask something else. I also I wonder, in my screen the presentation is like still not locked. I'm just wondering if it has been working for the whole time or not, because I see that I'm having some sort of internet connections issues. Sorry, excuse me?
I can see it. So can someone write in the chat if they can see it or not?
Yes,
They're
the
saying
presentation works. Okay.
Okay, good.
Okay, good, because I was always looking at this loading screen and I was just a little bit like
Yikes.
Okay, I'm glad that the chat can see it, and okay, that's good. That's why. But it ended abruptly. The video ended like abruptly, there were only like 4 seconds. Yeah, I've seen that on the timeline.
You didn't see like the thank you screen or anything? You didn't see this? Oh, they didn't. Okay. So, I mean, I don't know where it stopped, but basically I was going through this project, and then this was the poem I concluded with. So in case you missed it, I'll just leave this up for now, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
And
yeah, just a couple of seconds.
Oh, okay.
Because, yeah.
That's fine. Okay.
That's actually not that bad, because sometimes videos they just step in the middle, and we are so sorry when it happens like that.
No. I mean, you guys are pulling off like a Herculean task here, so you've done a great job. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. It's a pleasure for us to host such a vast amount of speakers and to hear to all these opinions. That's a huge, experience and amount of information which is compressed in only this 5 days exhibition. Yeah.
For sure.
Also very happy that the hangout room is pretty active for most of the time, and that you are bringing up the discussions over and over again. Yeah, sorry. Thank you.
Oh, Ishan's asking what's next for you, any more such projects? Yeah, I have some in the works. Yeah. I have some in the works, but apart from such projects, I'm also doing like some work with clients in the art sector, and I'm working on a book of movies for a movie podcast. So I'm also like doing some lighter stuff, not just this heavy, serious things all the time.
Okay, so I think that's it. If there is anything else you would like to say here in the chat, you're
Is
highly
that okay?
welcome.
This is my, so this is Ananya Khaitan's up on screen. That's my Instagram. That's my email.
Yeah.
So people can reach out to me there. I'd love to connect. And this has been a great talk. I'm looking forward, sorry, not my talk, great conference. And I'm looking forward to attending more sessions. Thank you so much,
Yeah,
Alona.
thank you.